So this lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden.
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of the word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word that
I'm
appears
going
in
to
the
continue
report,
with my questions. I'm going to continue with my questions.
I know that the term I ultimately reached related to whether sufficient evidence existed such that the likely outcome
you exonerated
would be a conviction.
I know that the term willful
retention
has a Mr. Hurt, it's my time.
Just a little while ago, Special Prosecutor Robert Hurt took the stand, so to speak. Really, it's a table. He's a witness in front of the House Judiciary Committee led by Congressman Jim Jordan. Robert Hurt was the special prosecutor and former U.S. attorney who oversaw the investigation into Joe Biden's criminal mishandling of classified documents. They were criminal, all right, but charges were never pressed by Mr. Hurt. We'll get into that in just a minute. But first, Mr. Hurt's opening statement.
My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. This evidence included an audio-recorded conversation during which Mr. Biden told his ghostwriter that he had, quote, just found all the classified stuff downstairs, end quote. When Mr. Biden said this, he was a private citizen speaking to his ghostwriter in his private rental home in Virginia. We also identified other recorded conversations during which Mr. Biden read classified information aloud to his ghostwriter. We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden. The department's regulations required me to write a confidential report explaining my decision to the Attorney General. I understood that my explanation about this case had to include rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis. In other words, I needed to show my work, just as I would expect any prosecutor to show his or her work explaining the decision to prosecute or not. The need to show my work was especially strong here. The Attorney General had appointed me to investigate the actions of the Attorney General's boss, the sitting President of the United States. I knew that for my decision to be credible, I could not simply announce that I recommended no criminal charges and leave it at that. I needed to explain why. My report reflects my best effort to explain why I declined to recommend charging President Biden. I analyzed the evidence as prosecutors routinely do, by assessing its strengths and weaknesses, including by anticipating the ways in which the president's defense lawyers might poke holes in the government's case, if there were a trial, and seek to persuade jurors that the government could not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There has been a lot of attention paid to language in the report about the president's memory, so let me say a few words about that. My task was to determine whether the president retained or disclosed national defense information willfully. That means knowingly and with the intent to do something the law forbids. I could not make that determination without assessing the president's state of mind. For that reason, I had to consider the president's memory and overall mental state and how a jury likely would perceive his memory and mental state in a criminal trial. These are the types of issues that prosecutors analyze every day.
All right, now we're going to get into the memory thing in just a minute, but let's pick up right where Mr. Hurt just stated that he saw evidence, very clear evidence, that Mr. Biden, as a private citizen, retained tons of classified documents. I mean, tons of classified documents. Take a look at this quick exchange that happened with Congressman Armstrong.
Mr. Hurt, classified documents were found at the Penn Biden Center?
That's correct.
They were found in President Biden's garage?
In Wilmington, Delaware, yes.
And in his basement den?
Also in the same home, yes.
In his main floor office?
Correct.
And his third floor den?
Correct.
At the University of Delaware?
Correct.
And at the Biden Institute?
Correct.
That's a lot of classified documents. That's a lot of violations of the law, especially compared, let's face it, to what President Trump is now facing in criminal charges that were levied against him, where he had documents still unclear as to whether he shouldn't or shouldn't have had them since he was president of the United States, very different than Joe Biden, who was a senator and a vice president. And he had them in one location at Mar-a-Lago in a locked office in a building that was patrolled not just by his own private security, but also by the Secret Service. Whereas here, it looks like you go to the Biden household and they offer you a cocktail, maybe some nice hors d'oeuvres. And, oh, by the way, if you make a mess, you can just clean it up with this extra classified document we have lying around. Also, you heard Mr. Hur mention these audio recordings that Joe Biden had with his ghostwriter for a book that he was writing. And Jim Jordan, the chairman of the committee, actually asked him some specific questions about that ghostwriter and the audio recordings in question.
What did that ghostwriter do with the information Joe Biden shared with him on his laptop? What did he do after you were named special counsel?
Chairman, if you're referring to the audio recordings that Mr. Zwanitzer created of his conversations with
Exactly
Biden,
what I'm referring to.
He slid, if I remember correctly, he slid those files into his recycle bin on his computer.
Tried to destroy the evidence, didn't he?
Correct.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, we'll get to Mr. Hur in a minute because I'm not so sure he's on the side of the angels here. But it's a real subtle way of saying destroyed evidence. He slid those files into his recycle bin on his computer. You mean he tried to delete the files? You mean he tried to destroy evidence? And he didn't try to delete those files until after a special prosecutor was named. Boy, it's a good thing none of these people are Republicans involved in this, right? You try deleting evidence when someone like Robert Mueller or James Comey or Robert Hur is investigating you while you're a Republican instead of Joe Biden and Joe Biden's ghostwriter. One other quick moment of cross-examination by committee members before we get back to Mr. Hur's opening statement when he's talking about Joe Biden's memory. This is at the hands of Mr. Nadler. He's the ranking member for the Democrats. Yeah, that's right. We're not just showing you exchanges with Republicans. Here's Nadler from New York. He's the ranking member, and when he's not trying to destroy Gotham City by fighting with the Cape Crusader, seriously, he looks like the Penguin, doesn't he? He's the Penguin. He's a supervillain. When he's not doing that, he's carrying water for Joe Biden and the Democrats, and he tried to press Robert Hur on a key part of the information here. Did Joe Biden ever lie to you? Thinking that this is going to be a great aha moment, right? A big gotcha moment.
At any point in your investigation, did you have any reason to believe that President Biden lied to you?
I do address in my report one response the president gave to a question that we had posed to him that we deemed to be not credible.
Let me rephrase that in English instead of lawyer-ese and congressman-ese. Did Joe Biden ever lie? Yes, he did. All right, let's get back to Mr. Hur's opening statement because this is where he addresses the question of Joe Biden's memory or lack thereof.
And because these issues were important to my ultimate decision, I had to include a discussion of them in my report to the Attorney General. The evidence and the president himself put his memory squarely at issue. We interviewed the president and asked him about his recorded statement. Quote, "I just found all the classified stuff downstairs," end quote. He told us that he didn't remember saying that to his ghostwriter. He also said he didn't remember finding any classified material in his home after his vice presidency. And he didn't remember anything about how classified documents about Afghanistan made their way into his garage. My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair. Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. I explained to the Attorney General my decision and the reasons for it. That's what I was required to do.
All right, now let's get into this because you'll remember this was sort of the big blockbuster moment when this report was first released, and rightly so. Mr. Hurt detailed how shady Joe Biden's memory is, how he forgot key events in his life just in the last several years, and he reached the conclusion that if a jury were to evaluate him, it would be hard for them to reach the conclusion that he was guilty since he probably just didn't remember utilizing classified documents in the way that he would have been criminally charged. Joe Biden, he didn't like the fact that this became a political problem, and he demanded an emergency press conference. And remember how angry he was about the suggestion that he didn't remember when his son died.
In addition, I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, wasn't any of their damn business.
Tough guy Clint Eastwood squinting at you. How the hell dare he? It's none of his damn business. That was good. People liked that he did that. He pushed back on it, right? Of course, a little later, he confused the country of Egypt with Mexico, but pay no attention to that. Well, now we actually have the transcript of Mr. Biden's testimony with Mr. Hur, and there's quite a bit to unpack here. First, just so you know, CBS News and the good soldiers and the mainstream corporate-owned media, they're doing their best to try to tell their viewers, how few there may still be, that Joe Biden is vindicated here. Here's Weijia Zhang, who is, I believe, the White House correspondent for CBS News. The president was fired up about Hur's claim that he couldn't remember when his son Beau died because it was false. He immediately said the date, according to the interview transcript. Wow, that's huge. Is that true, though? Is that really, really true? So at one point in the transcript, you see Mr. Biden bringing up the book that he was writing. It was called Promise Me, Dad. And it related to the loss of his son. You can see Mr. Hur in the transcript here says, we're going to be talking about Promise Me, Dad more further on and tomorrow as well. But please just allow me to say for a moment, I'm so terribly, terribly sorry for your loss. That doesn't sound like Robert Hurt being a jerk. How dare he bring this up? How dare he raise the question of my son? First of all, it was Joe Biden who raised the question of the death of his son by raising the issue of the book that he was writing with his ghostwriter called Promise Me, Dad. But then here's how the Washington Post described the exchange over whether Joe Biden remembered the date of his son's death. What month did here's Joe Biden. This is what he's saying. What month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th, he said, naming the correct day, according to the transcript. Two others in the room chime in with the year, and Biden questions again, was it 2015 when he died? Not long after the exchange, Hur suggested they considered taking a brief break. But honestly, that's sort of sugarcoating it too. That's the Washington Post who looked at the transcript and came up with the best possible description of what happened in the interview. Let's us actually look at the real data, the real facts, not the Washington Post looking at it and then deciding what their readers are allowed to know, shot through the lens of do whatever you can not to hurt Joe Biden too much. No, let's actually look at the reality. So Mr. Hur says, sir, during this time, when you were living at Chain Bridge Road, that's right across the Potomac River from D.C. and Virginia, and there were documents relating to the Penn Biden Center or the Biden Institute or the Cancer Moonshot or your book, where did you keep papers that related to those things that you were actively working on? And Biden then says, well, he's got a stutter, you know. Don't know. This is what, 2017, 2018, that area? Mr. Hur says, yes, sir. Biden says, remember, in this time frame, my son is either being deployed or is dying. And so it was, and by the way, there were still a lot of people at the time when I got out of the Senate that were encouraging me to run in this period, except the president, which actually makes no sense, but understand something for a second. He confirms the year 2017, 2018. Then he says, well, my son was either deployed or dying. No, his son died in 2015, right? And he said, I got out of the Senate and people were encouraging me to run for president. No, he got out of the Senate in 2009 when he became vice president. In 2017, he had just stopped being vice president, and he claims people were encouraging him to run for president. Does this sound like how the Washington Post described the exchange? All right, a little further on here, he says, but if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so that was happening. Though, what month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. Okay, so that's what the Washington Post were referring to. They skipped over all this other part where he thought Beau was deployed or dying 2017. Here he just names the date, but not the year, right? And that brings us to this other portion of it. Ms. Cotton, who I believe is one of the assistant prosecutors, says 2015. Unidentified male speaker, 2015. They're helping him out by telling him the year that Beau Biden died. Joe Biden never independently came up with the year. Then Biden says, was it 2015 he died? Then someone else helping him out says it was May of 2015. And then he says, oh, it was 2015. You see what happened there? No, I'm sorry. The transcript doesn't confirm, as CBS News just told their viewers, it doesn't confirm that Joe Biden knew when his son died. In fact, the transcript confirms that he was completely confused and thought that his son was either deployed or sick in 2017 or 2018, 2 to 3 years after his son had died. Of course, Robert Hurt was right to bring this up. Of course, we all, regular American citizens, are right to be terrified that this man is president of the United States. A little bit more that we've learned now from seeing the transcripts. Here's an interesting little tidbit. Once it was while lamenting that he could drive his vintage Chevrolet Corvette only the length of his driveway. The other time was during a lengthy exchange over the torque of electric vehicles. And Biden asks the special prosecutor, by the way, you know how it works? It's really cool. I think he's talking about the launch mode of a Corvette. Hurt says, sir, I'd love to hear much more about this, but I have some more questions. Here's Biden saying, you know how the Corvette works when you put it in launch mode? And Robert Hurt's like, sir, we're sort of investigating a crime here. I'm not really interested in how your Corvette works. And then Biden just ignores him, as doddering old men who are trying to play out the clock do. He says, you step your foot on the accelerator all the way down until it gets to about 6-7 grand. That's RPMs. Then all of a sudden, it'll say launch, and all you do is take your foot off the brake. And then the transcript indicates that he makes a car sound. In other words, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, while being questioned by Robert Hurt, the special prosecutor investigating whether he broke the law with the mishandling of classified documents, described how it is to get into launch mode in a Chevy Corvette, and then he went, vroom, vroom, vroom. It's the president of the United States going vroom, vroom, imitating the sound of his Corvette, his fancy fast car. Another moment when they were talking about how the prosecutors and investigators went through all of his boxes that had classified documents in them. And of course, they were mixed up all over the place with stuff. President Biden said, well, you left everything in place. I just hope you didn't find any risque pictures of my wife in a bathing suit, which you probably did. She's beautiful. What is wrong with this man? Who does that? Who does that? Hey, by the way, did you get a load of my wife? Take a look at her in a bathing suit. You see this, baby? And she's a doctor. Don't get me started on what kind of doctor she is, if you know what I mean, huh? Gross. Absolutely gross. But since today's narrative on Capitol Hill is going to be revolving around how absolutely 100% fine Joe Biden is, whenever the Democrats have a chance, when they say to Robert Hurt, how dare you, sir, challenge Joe Biden's memory, I think it's worth taking a look at how Joe Biden's brain is functioning these days. Here he was just yesterday. Just yesterday. You know, we keep hearing that he's at the top of his game. Didn't you see him screaming at everybody at the State of the Union? He's great. He's just fine. Okay, let's see how he's doing. Here he was yesterday.
Tremendous amount of things you can cut. Let me be precise. Tremendous amount of things you can do, not cut. He said, but the bottom line is he's still at it.
Yeah, boy, they're right. He's just fine. Jerry Nadler, we got nothing to worry about. Gosh darn it. He has every reason to have confidence in this man. knowing the nuclear codes. Here's a little more. He was referring to John McCain, the departed Republican senator.
Not long ago, my buddy John McCain passed away. My predecessor friend that's how he ended his career.
John McCain, my predecessor and friend. His predecessor was Donald Trump, who was not his friend. I mean, maybe he could make the case, since he ignores Trump's existence, that his predecessor was Barack Obama. Also, I don't think he's his friend. But John McCain was definitely not his predecessor. Joe Biden was asked about the fix on the border and whether it's going to, when it's going to be fixed.
President, when is an border executive action coming? An executive action on the border.
Count on the border action happened by itself, the passing it.
But Congress can't come.
When are you going to take executive action on the border? I'm counting on the action to take care of itself, he said. Has he forgotten that he's the president? Has he forgotten that he's the one who actually utilizes executive actions? In New Hampshire, he was having a campaign appearance, talking to what can only be described as captives in a hostage situation, rambling on. And then this happened.
Anyway, am I allowed to take any questions? Anybody here on staff?
Why is it funny that he asks permission to take questions from American citizens? And why is it just standard operating procedure now that the answer is always no, and then they pull the plug on the feed? This is literally what happened. If you were watching it, if you're a member of the media, they just pull the plug on the feed. No, the president is not well. But let's quickly get back to Mr. Hurt, the U.S. attorney, former. He quit yesterday, actually. I don't want to be a buzzkill here, but I wouldn't expect much from Mr. Hurt or from the fallout of this testimony, really. He's just confirming what he put in his statement. He's not going to go any further than that. Mr. Hurt, yes, quit his job in the Justice Department yesterday. Some people were saying, ooh, that's so he can tell all on Capitol Hill today. No, actually, that's not the case at all. Everything he says still has to be cleared through DOJ. And this is not a whistleblower. This is not a man who is putting his career on the line like the very brave IRS whistleblowers who called out the Justice Department for stifling the Hunter Biden investigation. No, Mr. Hurt, sadly, I believe, is part of the swamp. His job today is not to tell the full truth. If he serves any purpose right now by pointing out the president's mental incapacity, it's to give Democrats cover to replace Joe Biden so that they can win with a better candidate and better odds in November and still retain power. So that the machine that Mr. Hur has been a part of will continue to grow and expand unabated. Do not forget that Mr. Hur, before this job, was one of the attorneys on Robert Mueller's special investigation into Donald Trump and Russian collusion. Mr. Hur, sadly, today was not trying to get to the truth. Mr. Hur was auditioning for his next job as a very powerful lawyer, probably a partner at a K Street law firm in Washington, D.C. And to have that job, you've got to make sure you play by the rules. Not the law, not the Constitution, not the full truth. No, by the D.C. rules. And the testimony is still going on, but I'm pretty sure my take is valid. That's what we'll see today. What we need is systemic change. What we need is a new commander-in-chief.